But the second thing that I want to say here is that it's occurred to me over time that this is about much more than the Ukrainian and Russian war, right? That is not why his Mr. Macron put him on a plane to go speak to Trump in person about this issue, right? They did that because they are terrified. They are terrified because obviously everything I've uncovered is true. Fiction would not make you do that, okay? You'd go, this is so absurd. It's so crazy. I mean, who's going to believe that? Fiction does not make you fly 9 hours to the United States to ask the president if he has a moment to step aside out of the shot of cameras and speak about your wife, right? We can now, it is confirmed fact, put it on Wikipedia that Brigitte Macron was born Jean-Michel Trogneau. We can just go ahead and do that, right? But what did I hit at that has them really terrified? What was the success of that series? Looking into a web and understanding how deeply sinister whatever it is that is happening in Paris is. Looking into not just the current events, but the historical events. I mean, we put up a map and showed just how often they were involved in these pedophilic scandals. Silly ones. Putting the book for your Andre Gide, an admitted pederast, a guy who outwardly said, yes, I like young boys. And you choose that to be the book in your official portrait as the president of France. Emmanuel Macron did that. And I think there's more. I think there's more that they are afraid of. I think that it was a very powerful person, potentially someone more powerful than Brigitte, who told Macron, who is just a total fraud, a puppet, to get on that plane and make this request after they realized that sending legal letters wasn't the best idea. So what else is it that I've potentially uncovered about France? How does this relate to the United States? I'm going to tell you.com. All right, you guys. Here's where I'm going to pull it all together for you. Because we all know, here's the reality. The greatest trick the devil ever played was making the world believe that he didn't exist. Okay? And I have this thing. Call it my toxic trait. When the media takes me out of context and then just tells these sort of unbelievable lies about me and my perspectives, I never get discouraged. I just get interested. That's my toxic trait. I get, like, you can try to offend me, but I just get interested, especially when they're just being way too over the top, you know, like Holocaust tonight, whatever it is. If you're just being way too crazy, like self-hating Black woman, I'm like, what are you hiding? Like, you're obviously hiding something because you're way too triggered by what is likely, and listeners to the show now know, just a simple fact that I've delivered. And I'll give you an example of that. And I'll tell you how it relates to France and it relates to America. So back actually when I was at the Daily Wire, I did this episode and I was so interested in Sigmund Freud, right? Realizing that this dude was a total perv. I mean, just a total perv. And I gave examples of his, like, people that were surrounding him that were pervs, people that had been molesting their children. A lot too many of his friends have been molesting their children. And the reaction in the media was to call me unhinged and crazy and to defend Sigmund Freud as if he wasn't the guy who's writing all of these theories saying that, like, children are sexual and are just attracted to their parents. I mean, like, totally weird. Like, I'm not unhinged. He was unhinged, obviously. But them calling me that made me more interested. I'm going, why are you, like, so committed to defending this dead guy and attacking me? So I'm going to actually learn about Sigmund Freud, okay? So I order a book, and this is a book that was written by, you've heard me mention this before, by David Bacon. It's called Sigmund Freud and the Jewish Mystical Tradition. And essentially this guy posits in this book, and then he's able to verify what initially was his theory in the updated edition. He's able to confirm his theory was correct, that Sigmund Freud actually created the psychoanalyst movement to mainstream his religion, that actually he was practicing the Kabbalah. And if you look at the psychoanalyst early movement, as he does a very good job of assessing, you will recognize that they are mainstreaming the Kabbalah. Okay, so I'm learning about Sigmund Freud, and I happened upon this book, and I'm not just learning about Sigmund Freud, I am learning about a piece of history that I've never heard about in my entire life. And it concerns this guy Jacob Frank, okay? Is this man who caused a schism. We always talk about like Christian schisms and, and actually every faith has this, obviously, Sunni, the Shiites, but we never have really heard, or at least I hadn't heard about this huge schism that took place amongst people that were Jewish, that there was this huge schism. And it talks about how this guy who thought that he was the Messiah, okay, got into some really perverted things. And I'm just going to just read you this, and I promise you this is so important. I think this is really what it's all about, okay? In this chapter, which is entitled The Frankist Episode, I'll read you a couple of things. It tells us that this guy, Jacob Frank, was born in 1726 in Korolovka on the frontiers of Podolia and Wallachia. It tells us that his father was a Sabbatean who had been expelled from the Jewish community. So again, getting back to this fracture that happened, and essentially people that felt that the old Torah law had been fulfilled and that new messiahs were coming, and one such messiah was this Jacob Frank. It goes on to say, the tales which have come down to us indicate that he was what we would today call a psychopathic personality, a person without any strong superego formation. In his new Sabbatean doctrine, he asserted the idea of the Holy Trinity. He distinguished himself between God as having become incarnate, and he assigned the role of Messiah to himself. It says, quote, the idea of a male-female God became the occasion for sexual religious practices. The law, he declared, was dead. The yoke of the old Torah had been broken. I'm going to read that again. The idea of a male-female God became the occasion for sexual religious practices. Okay? And so he would have these sexual parties, the only way to describe it, where they would just do incredibly disgusting things. We'll get more into that later. He then begins to quote this Israeli historian who did a lot of research. I've read his books. His name is Gershom Scholem. And he explains that this religion believed, quote, the mystic does not even recoil before the inference that in a higher sense there is a root of evil, even in God. The doctrine of evil was given support by the thesis that the holy sparks had been scattered, and it was necessary for men to hand themselves into sin in order to regather them. The idea of the holy sin became prominent. Through sin, salvation would come. From the great sinning would emerge a world in which there would no longer be sin. This is starting to sound a lot to me like Schofield Bible principles and like the whole idea of the rapture. But anyways, he goes on, Frank had declared, quote, I have come to rid the world of all the laws and the statutes which have been in existence hitherto. Another person explaining this line of thought writes, the conception of the Messiah as he who must enter completely into the klippah, the demonic power of the shells, that he may liberate the holiness that is held there, and in doing thus fulfills the purpose of the exile of Israel and redeems Israel and the world in one. But even that is not enough. The holy sin becomes a pattern. Men must hurl themselves into sin in order to tear from it the holy sparks, and soon there is no sin any longer. And then it goes on to speak about how sexuality, like sex stuff, it hinges upon these sort of sexual parties. He writes, sexuality as the locus for the expression of personal freedom has, of course, deep roots. In the Zohar, the sexual metaphor is used very freely. The Orthodox tradition sharply restricted sexual expression, perhaps as has been suggested by some writers. And it tells us that the movement grew into a violent political threat to the Orthodoxy theocracy, and measures and countermeasures were taken by both sides. The Frankists were placed under excommunication, and the Frankists replied by an attack upon the Talmud, arguing that it was false and harmful. The Frankists even charged that the Talmud made use of Christian blood obligatory, and they lent testimony that the Jews were engaging in ritual murder. The climax of Frank's career came when he and all of his followers were converted to Catholicism with great pomp and ceremony. The members of the Polish nobility acted as sponsors, and the newly baptized Jews assumed their family names. Numbers of them thus came into Polish nobility. Jacob Frank himself had King Augustus III as his godfather and became a Catholic in the presence of the royal family and the court dignitaries in November of 1759, less than 100 years after the apostasy of Sabbatai Zevi, and less than 100 years before the birth of Sigmund Freud. Now, let me tell you why I'm telling you this. So I got interested in that. Someone who's thinking about becoming a Catholic, as I was, is learning that, whoa, okay, wait a second. I learned more about Jacob Frank. I realized that they believed that you had to practice incest as a sacrament. They believed that they basically just had to keep intermarrying one another and that they would achieve power. They believed in the cult of military. Essentially, like I said, going deeper into sin, the greatest sin that you could commit, because he said, I'll bring you down into the depths, would be this act of pedophilia. That they were having these rituals. I learned when he entered the Catholic Church, so I'm not just going to end with that book. I need to learn everything I can about this guy, right? Because what's going on here? And the more I learned about him, I was positively astounded that they practiced also apostasy. So they believed that the way to take down your enemies was to convert into their faiths. If you wanted to take down Christianity, you had to become a Christian. And then from within, you could break down the church. Think about what the world was, the empires were Christian at this time, and they did this. His followers did this. They mass converted multiple times. We then learned that Frankists convert. Earlier in that earlier episode, he becomes Muslim. The Sabbatians became Muslim. So but they're all the same family, which is crazy. And so in trying to learn more about Jacob Frank, and I'm buying all of these books, and I'm going, is this cult still alive today? Is this really over? Because suddenly I talk about it on a podcast, and I've got all of these organizations screaming at me, going, this is a fringe cult. It's over. This isn't happening anymore. It's irrelevant. Oh, but they lied. Of course they lied, because when you freak out about something you shouldn't freak out about, if this was really a fringe cult and it's so over, why do you care? Like, why do you care if we're talking about something that's over? Oh, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. And let me tell you guys, what I discovered right away was not only was this cult not over, but that it made it here to the United States. And we kind of elected a Supreme Court justice that believed in this, that Louis Brandeis came from a family of Frankists. See, Jacob Frank had sexual relations with his daughter. They believed in incest. They believed in breeding. You had to constantly have tons of children. And she became, because they were trying to kind of put the Catholic tradition on its head, they turned her into sort of the unholy Mary. I know I feel blasphemous even saying that, but this is the reality of what these people believed in. And I'm just showing you this article, which explicitly says that we know, can you pull up this JSTOR article, Skylar, just so we can pull this up here? Yeah. Meet Eva Frank, the first Jewish female Messiah. I want to show you this last sentence here. This is crazy. It tells us at the very end of that paragraph. Here we go. So we don't have to even buy it. There we go. So it says, we know that U.S. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis had such a portrait, speaking about Eva Frank, given to him by his mother, descended from a prominent line of Jews who continued to revere Eva Frank. And I looked into it, and she carried on for her father. Her father became a baron. Jacob Frank became a baron, Baron Frank, who had a castle in Offenbach, Germany. These rituals were happening. And one of the things that they concerned themselves with was chemistry, starting pharmaceuticals, right? And you go, what the heck is going on here? And then Eva Frank, before she died, wrote these red letters and told all of her followers, if you believe in this Frankist, this Frankist cult, then you need to apostatize again, convert into various Protestant faiths, Christian faiths, and hide yourselves. These were called red letters that she sent to all of her faithful followers. But you're never going to guess, French people that are watching this, because everywhere I look, I'm starting to try to chase this Frankist movement. Where is it? Its tentacles are everywhere. Then I buy a book from Gershom Scholem, that Israeli historian, and this book is called From Frankism to Jacobinism. You're talking the Jacobins, the French Revolution, which was started. And lo and behold, I learn that one of the people that funded this movement in a very big way, and you may have heard his name, Junius Frey, that was his French name, because part of this movement, they believed, again, apostasy, take on a different character. It's like theater. Become someone else, be convincing about who you are, and we'll take over the world. And Junius Frey, actually, his real name when he was born was Moses Dobrushka. He was the cousin of Jacob Frank, and he learned French, went down into Strasbourg, and began funding people. Who rented a house, actually, and began funding people, writing, publishing about this revolution that needed to happen, fostering the revolutionary spirit. Can you pull up Moses Dobrushka's Wikipedia? Because this is really, truly incredible. It tells you Moses Dobrushka, alias Junius Frey. He was a writer, a poet, and a revolutionary. He converted from Judaism to the Catholic faith. He took the name first Franz Thomas Schonfeld. So he apostatized once, became Franz Thomas Schonfeld, then did it again after he was elevated to the nobility in Vienna. So a lot of them were in Vienna. This book kind of makes that clear. Then became Franz Thomas Edler von Schonfeld. Then he became Junius Frey. You can see that in 1792, in the wake of the French Revolution, he traveled to Strasbourg to Paris and became a Jacobin, changing his name once again to Junius Frey. The new name derived from Junius, from the Roman Juni family that fostered the famous tyrant slayer Brutus. I am telling you guys, when you start looking into this and you realize that these people had a plot to crush empires and they just converted, and because then people don't know what's happening. Then, whoa, you're in the Catholic Church. You're going, what are these pedophile scandals? What's happening? What genius? And at the same time, you're just intermarrying within your own family. And they had faithful followers. It is one of the things that has really blown my mind, because we know that this sort of modern over-sexualized culture, whenever you speak to academics about it, they're like, well, it began in French. Right? The French Revolution was sexual. And then I learned this, and I realized that there is a theology to this, that people actually believe in this. And the fact that you are not allowed to speak about this without reporters coming to attack you should concern you. That tells you something's not dead, right? Something is not dead if you can't talk about it. No one would care. Like I said, if you talk about weird things that took place in history, it's just interesting. But you have all of these writers trying to protect this little piece of history. And we learned that these people became very involved with public. They knew that they had to control publishing houses. They created the music. There was so much writing. And it is interesting when you recognize that it made it all the way to America. Lyndon Baines Johnson was by the way, very, very, very obsessed with a couple of weird things that happened into America. We should probably get into that on my book club, because I don't want to get like banned for speaking about that. Ooh, someone's calling me. Hope it's not the White House. It's not. We're good. And it's been interesting. It's been interesting to also recognize that a lot of this history is just being hidden from us. And when I think about us barreling toward this AI destination, which I think is happening right now, and children, so many of them who can't even read, who don't have the attention span to be able to read, who are asking AI questions and thinking that they're getting the true answers. I can just imagine a time where they just rinse the internet of all of this stuff, where people are no longer able to read books or don't want to read books, whatever it is, and they don't know this history. It's why I started my book club, because I was just amazed at how much happened that I don't know about. And I realized how much power we give the school system, the public school system, the publishing houses, to tell us what we need to know. That's it. Oh, the French Revolution. Don't look at beyond that. It's just, some frisky French people, and here's what happened, and that's it. No, but everything, as my husband told me when I asked him why he decided to master in theology, like, why were you so driven toward theology when you went to university? And he says, because everything is theology. Everything's a faith. Faith is what guides people, right? And you think about Sigmund Freud turning his faith into something modern, right? Making you not even believe it's a faith, that it's a psychoanalytic movement. Oh, no, that's not a faith. That's what this book at least spells out pretty clearly with a lot of evidence. Yeah, that they could baptize you into their faith and you don't even realize it. And we're learning about this sort of mixture of the male and the female. That's what he believed in. And suddenly we're looking up and you've got all of these psychiatrists who are telling us that no, like transgenderism is totally a thing. I find that to be interesting, at least compelling, something that we can talk about. Like, that's interesting. Very interesting. And now we have in Paris, Brigitte Macron. And rather than the publications being interested in that, they block it. They say, oh no, that's a crazy conspiracy. We could not have produced more evidence that something is not right there. And they will not even look at it. What does that tell you? Who is in power? Who are these people that are in power? I'll tell you one thing. They are people that understand the threat of anybody learning that this could potentially be a theology that is operating in plain sight. And like I said, I think in my book club last week, I said, are we the muggles? You know, to use a Harry Potter expression here, like, are we the muggles? We have been led to believe that we're atheist, right? And I'm kind of going back to the old we, like, oh, atheism, like your grandparents were crazy to believe in the Lord, and oh my gosh, no, this is the new age. You're smarter. It's all about the self, what you can do. You're an atheist. There's no such thing as an atheist. There's no such thing as an atheist. You believe in something. And if somebody has turned you into a muggle while they very much believe God is real, because they created a whole doctrine and a philosophy that they are following, trying to convince us that they are the gods, right? That they can turn society into whatever it is that they want, keeping us blinded because we don't realize that this is a spiritual battle, but they know it is, and they're fighting for your spirit and they're winning. Yeah. Pretty interesting stuff. Pretty interesting stuff. Anyways, I gave you a lot to consider here. People are obviously all over the world waking up, and people are choosing goodness or they are choosing evil. And I will tell you that it feels almost like these events are being catalyzed. You're suddenly seeing people who you thought were real and honest and recognizing that they lie, whether that's a pastor, whether that's a political person that you follow, whether it's a newspaper organization that you're reading. I hope the point of this podcast, if you take anything away from my podcast, it's that you need to constantly examine who you're listening to and read these books, like educate yourself. And once you become educated, like I have said since the beginning of my career, an educated mind cannot be enslaved. And you'll start to previously examine your earlier enslavements. And I could say a lot, but I'd save the rest of it for my book club because we're reading a lot of this on my book club. And we'll save it for there. By the way, if you want to join the book club, CandaceOwens.com. I see that they put a little prompt up. So the conversations get pretty spicy, and we are definitely threading all of this together very slowly. And it's amazing and terrifying at the exact same time. Something that I forgot to add, by the way, one more dot I want to connect for you, just so I can throw it all out here, is that Jacob Frank's mother's her surname is Hirschl, spelled Hirschl. And I was able to connect a dot that they are related to Theodore Herzl. And I have that all in a file somewhere because this has been a long effort to get books. Some books are not in print anymore. And what would that say if Theodore Herzl was from a Frankist family? I know there's some very strange things about what happened with his daughters, and the only communication, this is very interesting, especially after you read this book, that Sigmund Freud and Theodore Herzl, they didn't really know each other, but clearly something happened, and Sigmund Freud sent him his work, psychoanalysis, if you will, sent him a book or a reference or whatever it was about the psychoanalytic movement. And he sent it to him to help him deal with his daughters. So I thought that was interesting. And then you learn that like his daughters committed suicide. Theodore Herzl, they say, oh, it's a terrible life. His daughters were just, dealing with mental issues. And now that I know what I know about Sigmund Freud, which is that he was covering for pedophilia, and that when he learned that a bunch of the women had been assaulted by their parents, he then gaslit them. Like, that's what he's famous for. He's famous for creating gaslighting. Like, that really is it. I have questions about Theodore Herzl. I do. I'm just going to put that out there, and I'm not going to put it out as fact. I'm going to just send you down to do your own research. And yeah, a murderous cult. They believed, like, you learn about what the Frankists believe, and it was a military cult. And they'd say, I don't like it. I don't like that when I'm reading the theology, it sounds too much like when we get into people that believe that you have to kill, like what happens if a genocide